A new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth disappeared, and the sea vanished. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared and ready like a bride dressed to meet her husband. I heard a loud voice speaking from the throne. Now God's home is with mankind. He will live with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them, and he will be their God. He will wipe away all tears from their eyes. There will be no more death, no more grief, or crying, or pain. The old things have disappeared. Then the one who sits on the throne said, "And now I make all things new." He also said to me, "Write this, because these words are true and can be trusted." And he said, "It is done. I am the first and the last, the beginning and the end. To anyone who is thirsty, I will give the right to drink from the spring of the water of life without paying for it. Whoever wins the victory will receive this from me. I will be his God, and he will be my son."
We have a very special speaker this morning, and as we wait for his arrival, let's just reflect on these verses that Mary Lou just read for us. I forgot the microphone. I'm not used to this technology. We'll see if we can get it to clip somewhere here. It's not going to go there. We'll go to plan B. Well, good morning and happy Sabbath.
Happy Sabbath.
Is it working?
Yes.
So glad that you came here today to worship with us. I know most of you have probably heard my story before, but I appreciate the chance to share it with you because I perhaps know the story the best of anyone. So I'm grateful for the chance that I have today to share my story with you. I grew up in a small town in Judea called Bethany. It was a great place to grow up. It was close to Jerusalem, so we could go to the big city, kind of like you people go to Seattle to the big city. Otherwise, we lived in the country, so I could climb the Mount of Olives with my friends, and we could look at the views from up there. We could go out into the desert, and we could climb on rocks or climb trees. We could swim in the local rivers that were there. It was just great to explore and to grow up in this area of Bethany. When I was young, I especially enjoyed catching lizards and taking them home and keeping them as pets for a while. Life was good. Sadly, my parents died when I was young, but I had two older sisters who picked up the pieces and who kept our family together. They took really good care of me because I was the little brother. Our lives were pretty predictable and routine. We lived in a quiet place. Oh, you will recognize their names. That was Mary and Martha. Then came the day that we met Jesus. He'd come to Bethany to teach and was teaching people about his Father, was trying to get them to understand that what the Pharisees were teaching at that time was not quite accurate. He didn't agree with them, and unfortunately, that did not endear him to them, but it endeared us to him. His words brought us hope and encouragement. He said his Father's kingdom is built on love and acceptance. He taught about the importance of forgiveness, and he told us how to live lives in a way and treat each other with kindness and respect so that we got along with others. From our first meeting, my faith in Jesus was strong. My love for him was deep. I could tell that Christ's love was deep for me too. The Savior blessed all who sought his help. He loved the human family, but to some he was bound by a particularly tender association. His heart was knit by a strong bond of affection to my sisters and me. You see, he often found a place of rest at our home. Since he had no home of his own, he was dependent on the hospitality of others and his disciples. And often when weary and thirsting for human fellowship, he was glad to escape away from the hassles and the problems that he encountered in his daily life, the suspicion and jealousy especially of the angry Pharisees. In our home, he found a sincere welcome, a pure and holy friendship. In our home, he could speak with simplicity and total freedom, knowing that his words would be understood and treasured rather than judged and criticized. I really feel like Jesus appreciated our quiet home and the fact that we loved to listen to him. As he traveled from place to place, people were always critical of his words, and they doubted that he was the Messiah. But at our house, we knew who he was, and we let him know of our love and acceptance for who he was. I especially loved going on walks with him because he would draw object lessons from things that we would see on our walks. And he would point things out to us to help us to better understand who God, his Father, was. He would talk about the flowers of the field. He'd point out the birds of the air and talk about how these things totally depended on God for their lives, and that we too needed to do that. He would point out the soft dew that was on the leaves in the morning, or the sunshine that was shining during the day. And he even pointed out the stars at night and encouraged us to look at the beauty in the night sky. But it was especially in our home that Jesus found rest and comfort from the constant conflict he experienced in public life. Now, sometimes my sister Mary got herself in a bit of trouble because she wouldn't help Martha when Martha thought that it was her role to do that. So if Martha was getting dinner ready or something like that, it wasn't good if Mary wasn't there helping. And I remember one time in particular when Mary was so focused on Christ's words, she was oblivious to everything around her. Martha tended to get rather worked up rather easily because she was focused on hospitality, and that's a good thing. She was wanting everything to be just right. And she finally came to Jesus this day and said, "Lord, don't you care that my sister is not helping me get the meal ready? Can you suggest that maybe she come and help me so I can get the food ready faster for you and your disciples. Jesus' words were kind and patient when he said, Martha, Martha, you are very careful, yet troubled about many things. But there's something else you need, and that is what Mary has chosen. And what she has chosen can't be taken away from her. I think that Jesus meant that Mary was choosing to listen to his words, words that were more precious than anything else to her. What Martha was doing was important, but not as important as listening to those words of Jesus and storing them away in her heart, because those words would help prepare her for the future, for the things that were to come. Sometimes things were going to get hard, and she'd have to endure those things, and she would be better able if she had those words hidden in her heart. And at that point, she had no clue how soon a big trial was going to come. Because it was very soon after that that I got very sick. It was something really bad. Mary and Martha were very worried about me. Sure, we got sick every once in a while. We'd be sick a few days and then we'd get better. But this sickness was different. It was really bad. I was so sick that they feared I would die. So they did the logical thing. They sent word to Jesus, knowing that where he was, illness could not be present.
Amen.
And they just wanted him to come home, because they knew by his coming I would be well. They simply sent the message, he whom you love is very sick. They didn't put any demands on him or any expectations. They simply figured that as soon as he got that message, he would leave and come right away and it would be taken care of. They thought he would just stop doing whatever he was doing and come back to Bethany and everything would be okay. The messenger returned, but did not bring Jesus. But the Savior did send a message. He said, this sickness is not going to end in death. Well, I was so sick. My sisters tell me that I was mostly unconscious. I couldn't eat or drink anything. And this message gave them hope that I would be okay. But in just a short time, when I died, they were bitterly disappointed. People have asked me, what's it like to die? Well, I truly have to say I don't know, because I was so sick. I was just laying on the bed, mostly unconscious. And when I took my last breath, I can't really tell you what it felt like. I was so out of it, I didn't feel anything. Jesus had taught us that death was like a sleep, and that indeed is what it was for me. I was asleep. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't realize how sick I was, and I didn't even know when I died. My sisters did. And what I share with you is what Mary and Martha told me after Jesus brought my life back to me. They immediately sent a message to Jesus saying that I had died. And again, they assumed that he would come right away. Some of his disciples told Mary that they too had assumed that they would leave immediately, but they didn't. And his words to the disciples kind of confused them at that point. He said again, this sickness will not end in death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified. The disciples knew that his presence in our home would bring a real comfort to Martha and Mary and our other family members that were there. Yet he stayed where he was for 2 more days. And then finally he said, it's time for us to go to Judea. Understand that when they first got word of my sickness, the disciples wanted to go right then. But now that I was dead, they started thinking about some other things. They started fearing for their lives and for Jesus' life, because they remembered that it was just a short time before that people had gathered up stones in preparation for stoning him because they did not like him so much. So the disciples needed some words of encouragement that day. So he explained it further. He said, if a man walks in the day, he will not stumble, because he has the light of day to see by. He who does the will of God, who walks in the path that God has marked out, cannot stumble and fall. He explained it further by saying the light of God's guiding spirit gives him a clear perception of his duty and leads him safely until his work is done. By that, Jesus was trying to tell the disciples that his work was not done yet, and they did not need to worry going back to that situation where the disciples were convinced there was going to be grave danger there, and that they would be protected when they went back to Bethany. It was after that he said again, our friend Lazarus is sleeping, so let's go to him so that I can wake him up. I guess for a time they'd forgotten about me. They were so concerned about themselves and Jesus. But now they remembered me. But their thoughts were along the lines, well, if he's sleeping, when people are sick, they sleep, so he'll get better, and by the time we get there, he will be okay. Jesus kind of heard him talking about this, and he very plainly said, Lazarus is dead. And I'm actually glad I wasn't there, and you will see why. So these are Jesus's words. He says, many will believe after they see what I will do. So Jesus had a plan the whole time. And it was Martha that told me that it was then that Thomas spoke up and said, if Jesus is going, let's all go with him, that we may die with him. And so they returned to Bethany. We all now understand that Jesus knew what he was doing the whole time. Throughout this several-day period, he suffered along with Martha and Mary. He felt the pain of their loss. But he knew that an even greater victory would be gained for them, for me, for himself, and for his disciples, and for many others present that day. So here's something I really want you to remember. To all who are reaching out to feel the guiding hand of God, the moment of greatest discouragement is the time when divine help is the nearest. Let me say that again. To all who are reaching out to feel the guiding hand of God, the moment of greatest discouragement is the time when divine help is the nearest. And that includes each of us. From every temptation and every trial, he will bring you through with a firmer faith and a richer experience. And this is what he told me later. In delaying to come to me when I was so sick, he had a purpose of mercy toward those who had not yet accepted him as the Messiah. So he delayed, so that by raising me from the dead, he might give to these stubborn, unbelieving people another evidence that he was indeed the resurrection and the life. His heart was breaking because of their attitudes and their stubbornness. He just wanted them to understand who he was. In his mercy, it was his plan to give one more evidence that he was the restorer, the one who alone could bring life back to the dead. This would be an evidence that the priests could not misinterpret. So this was why he delayed. This crowning miracle, raising me from death, was to set the seal of God on his work and on his claim of divinity. Now remember, I didn't know any of this at that time. Why? Because I was dead. And I was wrapped in grave clothes, like those over there, and I was in a sealed tomb, and I was beginning to stink. When they came near our home, Jesus sent a message to Martha, asking her to come to where he would be waiting. He knew that there were some in his home who were his worst enemies, and he chose to stay away at that time to avoid any conflict. When she found him and their eyes met, she felt such a tenderness and such a love for the Savior. But she expressed her faith in her words, "Lord, if you had been here sooner, my brother would not have died." She quickly added, "I know that even now, whatever you ask of your Father, he will give it to you." Jesus' words brought encouragement once again. Your brother will rise again. Of course, she thought he meant in the resurrection, and she never dreamed that he meant that very day. Jesus went on to talk a little more about being the resurrection and the life, trying to help Martha fully understand what he was saying. And then he asked her if she believed. And she said, "Yes, Lord, I believe." She didn't quite get it all at that point, but she got enough that her belief was strong. So she confessed her faith in him, and then she left to go get Mary. When Mary got to where he was, she said the same thing that Martha had said. "If you'd been here, our brother would not have died." And it was at that point that Jesus asked Mary to take him to the tomb where they had placed my body. Once there, it seemed like everybody was crying. My sisters, other family members, my friends, many were genuinely sad, but there was a group of people there who were just going through the motions because that was the thing to do at the tomb of somebody who had just died. What Mary and Martha remembered the most about what happened next had a deep impact on me. They told me that Jesus started weeping. Again, it was later that Jesus explained to me that yes, he was sad, and he indeed was crying. But his tears were because he knew that many who were there mourning for me, Lazarus, that day, would soon be plotting his own death. He didn't weep for me because he knew that he was just about to call me from the grave. I'd been placed in a cave in a rock, and a massive stone had been placed across the entrance. And he said, "Take the stone away." Martha told me that she protested immediately, stating I'd been dead for 4 days and we didn't want to move that stone because it was not going to smell good. And again, Jesus told her that he had planned this conversation so that no one could say that he had performed some sort of deception and that I really hadn't been dead. When they moved that stone, everyone knew because they could smell. Martha continued to protest, so Jesus spoke quite firmly. Did I not say that if you believed, you would see the glory of God today? In other words, why are you doubting in regard to my power? You have my word, Martha. If you believe, you will see the glory of God today. And he said again, take away the stone. Now, I've thought about that many times. Because of who he was, Jesus could have said, stone, move, and the stone would have moved. He could have said, angels, move the stone, and the angels would have been there to do that. But he needed those looking on to see that the stone was moved by human hands. And that, again, was to show that divinity needed to work with humanity in life here on earth. So the command is obeyed, the stone is moved away. The onlooking crowd can see my body laying in there. Mary told me at that point, it got eerily quiet. Everybody just looked. They wanted to see what would happen next. Jesus stepped a little bit closer to the tomb, and lifting his eyes, he said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know you always hear me, but it is because of the people who are gathered around me now that I say this, so that they will believe that you have sent me. After this, he said in a very loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And those are the words I heard. Now remember, I've been dead quite a few days, but I heard those exact words. Many of the people watching said his voice was clear and penetrating. And indeed it was, because it pierced the ears of a dead man. People also said that as he spoke, divinity flashed through humanity. In his face, which was lit up by the glory of God the Father, the people saw the assurance of his power. Every eye then was focused on the entrance to the cave. Every ear was just listening for the slightest sound from within the tomb. But for me, I heard his voice, and I knew who was calling me, and I wanted to answer. But it's kind of hard to walk when you're wrapped up in these tightly around. So I kind of threw my legs over the edge, and then I went like this so I could get over to where the door was, because I was kind of tied up at the time. And everybody just started gasping and just looked as I was standing there. And Jesus finally had to say, can somebody help him? Get him unwrapped so he can come on out. And there I stand, free from the grave clothes, free from sickness, free from death. And I ran to Jesus and fell at his feet, praising him and thanking him for what he had done for me at that moment. It was a miracle of miracles. It's what I'd like you to think about this morning. My question for you today, are you trapped in a tomb? Are you bundled up in something that's keeping you from living your life fully? Are you trapped in a tomb of depression or of addiction or despair? Are you trapped in a tomb of unforgiveness or anger or hate? Are you trapped in a tomb of sadness or self-destructive behavior? Whatever it is, Jesus is calling you today. Come forth. He will roll the stone away. will you hear his voice and allow him to call you forth from that and to set you free from what's keeping you from living your life in him to the fullest? Turn it over to him and trust him to take care of that for you. There's a contemporary Christian group called Cain, and they have a song called Rise Up, Lazarus. It's a brother and two sisters. And don't be distracted by what you see maybe in the video, but focus on the words.